Liar.
Everywhere.
On netrootsradio.com.
David Waldman.
Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Friday, October 17th, 2025. One more time. Into the breach, I guess. It is Friday, gateway to chaos in the Trump administration. We're kind of back on the weekend chaos schedule. We'd been missing the weekend chaos for a while, but I guess they, I don't know what, emptied all of the chemotherapy materials into the orange guy's hands, and now we all just get to enjoy him for a couple of weeks before he heads back for more treatment. He's on his way to Florida. Mar-a-Lago season has started. It's not that cool just yet, but you know, he's a bit of a morning golfer, mid-morning golfer, I guess I would say. And I guess he doesn't like wearing extra layers. He wants to go down and stay toasty warm and open up the patio, and he's promised all his friends a great buffet at Mar-a-Lago, and that's where he's going today. Certainly warm enough to stay around and golf in the mid-70s by the afternoon, but he likes to be eating his second lunch by that time, so he doesn't hang around for the warm temperatures. So down to Florida he goes, but not before. I have to do some things, some business. I have to go to the office and sit in a golden chair and yell things at the press. Vladimir Zelensky, or Zelensky, I think the news guys have gotten around to the protocol of dropping the second Y mostly, I think. I don't know. I haven't checked every outlet. But Zelensky is in town to have a meeting with Trump. They're on better terms these days as Trump, I don't know whether he's beginning to figure out that Putin doesn't like him or is using him or just isn't going to do what he wants him to do. I'm not certain what he really thought of their relationship. There's no telling what's in Trump's head. But we're moving into a new phase with Ukraine. Just sort of seamlessly, Trump said, actually, maybe we're on Ukraine's side in all of this after all. And not super strongly, although everything I do is very strongly. But yeah, they'll be sitting down and talking about the possibility of shipping missiles. I think they were saying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine in its defense in the 3-year-old war on Russia. And it seems like every chance he gets, Trump touts this as a move toward ending his 957th war this week. So, I don't know. I guess that means he's fairly serious about trying to do something. He wants to rack up the number of wars he says he's stopped. Meanwhile, of course, fully at war or provoking a war with Venezuela, although he keeps insisting the war is really with drug gangs. I won't tell you which ones, or who's in them, or why I think they're drug gangs, but, whatever. Let's see, another boat targeted in the Caribbean just the other day. I think we made mention of that one. But intrepid reporters tracking down the story, finding all sorts of new information about these boats, including some families who have stepped forward who have said, yeah, I had a family member on that boat, and, they may have something to say about whether or not they were, in fact, drug smugglers. A report crossed my desk earlier at some point that another boat had been hit, but that this boat wasn't Venezuelan in origin, but Colombian in origin, which at least, in the popular mind poses a slightly higher elevated risk of it actually maybe being involved in drug smuggling. That's bad news for Colombians, of course, but for a long time, Colombians have known that they've been unfairly tarred. Well, I mean, it's fair to tar drug smuggling out of Colombia as a real thing. Unfair, of course, to say, oh, well, you're from Colombia, you must be a drug smuggler or know someone who is. Well, maybe you do. Anyway, I don't know how prevalent it is and how frequently drug smugglers in Colombia tell other people, so what do you do? Well, I'm a house painter. I'm a drug smuggler. How you doing? I don't think that's what's going on. But when I say in the popular mind, I mean the popular American mind, which is not that popular around the world, as it turns out. But if you tell people, well, they blew up a boat that they said was smuggling drugs from Colombia, people tend to believe it. Although I don't know whether they said this one too was smuggling fentanyl, which they're not. But at any rate, but in addition to that, there were reports that the people on board some of these boats are also not Venezuelan, not Colombian either. In fact, I guess the article I had relatively close at hand is that there were citizens of Trinidad on board one of these boats, two, as a matter of fact, and apparently reported dead. But the administration was pretty sure and wanted to tell everybody everybody on board was not only Venezuelan, but a drug smuggler at that. These are, of course, fishermen from Trinidad, they are actually, did they say they were Trinidadian citizens, or were they, in fact, from Trinidad and Tobago? They don't say Tobago, do they? Maybe. I don't know. I've not been. And then I was like, well, what do you call them if they're from there? And they're not toboggans, are they? That's clearly not to be the case. But The Guardian has that news, and, to take a more serious bent on it, we should take a look at this. Trinidad citizens, thankfully they're from Trinidad and not Tobago, believed killed in U.S. airstrike off Venezuela coast, have been identified. They have some photos here, I guess probably offered up by the family. They're not, they're not clear, sharp portraits of these folks, just candids, everyday shots, maybe from a cell phone. Rishi Samaru and Chad, known as Charpo Joseph, believed to have been on that boat that Trump alleged was carrying drugs to the United States. Republicans will immediately say, well, they were no angels. And I'm sure they were not. There's some question about one of them having a criminal background. But I mean, you're talking about somebody among the general population in the world scraping to get by, such that they find themselves on a boat off the coast of Venezuela when it is, now been made dangerous by the United States to be on a boat off the coast of Venezuela. There may be something that Americans would point to and say, aha, it's okay to kill them because foreign, brown, criminal. Anyway, family members and neighbors have identified two men from Trinidad and Tobago. How do I not know this? Who are believed to be among 6 people killed in a U.S. airstrike on a boat allegedly transporting drugs from Venezuela, despite, not being from there, but it's an international trade. Without providing evidence, Donald Trump said on Tuesday, he'll never say with evidence, that the strike in international waters had killed 6, he says, narco-terrorists, and claimed that intelligence confirmed the vessel was trafficking narcotics and it was associated with illicit narco-terrorist networks. A lot of big words in there for him. Trinidad police say they were still confirming whether Trinidadians were among the dead, but residents of the North Coast fishing village of Las Cuevas told The Guardian that 2 locals, Chad Charpo Joseph and Rishi Samaru, were on that sunken vessel. Samaru was released from prison in 2021 after serving time for his role in a 2009 murder of a street vendor. Watch out for that guy, I guess. Well, not anymore. Speaking with local media outlets, Joseph's mother, Lenore Burnley, said her 26-year-old son was not involved in drugs and lamented that the family had no body to bury. I leave everything in God's hand, she said. Burnley told AFP by phone that people her family knew in Venezuela told them he was on the boat. According to maritime law, if you see a boat, of course, you are supposed to stop the boat and intercept it, not just blow it up. That's our Trinidadian maritime law, and I think every fisherman and every human knows that, she says. So, by the way, Mom is, at least passingly familiar with international maritime law, because that's their life. Burnley said her son was planning to return to Trinidad and Tobago after spending 3 months with family in Venezuela, just 6.8 miles away. In case you were wondering, what is this traffic between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago? And, well, it's a 6.8 mile boat ride. That's going to be fairly frequently made by a lot of people with a lot of agendas, mostly innocent. Anyway, Joseph's grandmother, Christine Clement, also rejected claims of trafficking, calling the attack wickedness. At least 27 people have been killed so far in such attacks, amazingly enough, off the coast of Venezuela, which the Trump administration says are necessary to protect the United States from narcotics smuggled from Venezuela. Last month, fishers, we're just doing that now. We're not gendering them anymore. They're fishers. Fishers in Las Cuevas told The Guardian that they were afraid of being caught in the crossfire amid Trump's war on drugs in the region. I mean, yes, that too. But what they're saying, honestly, is not being caught in the crossfire, but being targeted for the crime of being in a boat trying to get something to eat off the coast of Venezuela. Instead of their usual route heading west toward Venezuela, fishers, this is from Trinidad though, said they now head east, staying close to the coast of Trinidad, which I'm sure makes no difference whatsoever to the Trump administration. The Washington Post reported on Thursday that the U.S. had since expanded its mission, there you go, with elite Special Operations Aviation Unit helicopters conducting training exercises in the region, training to kill people. Trinidad, well, that's what they do. Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister, Kamla Persad Bissessar, perhaps? I'm going to Bissessar, had previously expressed strong support for a U.S. strike on a Venezuela-based drug vessel, telling local journalists she had no sympathy for traffickers. She just, I guess, should have maybe checked about whether they were traffickers or not. But, you're trying to stay in Trump's good graces, and, right out of the gate, you don't want to be the one saying, oh, the United States president is a liar and a murderer. I mean, the drug trade is plaguing the Caribbean, no doubt. So, and there certainly has to be some drug traffic through her country, and she must be frustrated by it. But on the other hand, we know nothing. I know nothing about the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and where they stand on issues of all sorts. But this sounds a little rough. Said she had no sympathy for drug traffickers, and that the U.S. military should, quote, kill them all violently. Now, I have to say, that doesn't sound great. She added that the military mission would reduce violence in the region and asked for divine protection for U.S. personnel involved in the mission. All right, so I'm not, as a non-voter in Trinidad, I'm going to stay non-involved in that one. But okay, that sounds a little weird. But then again, we also heard, I guess, after the fact, that the Nobel Peace Prize winner, who is in fact an opposition leader from Venezuela, had a lot to say in support of these missions too. So I don't know. Domestically, I'm unhappy, naturally, with the idea that Trump can execute these executions without providing any proof or any evidence to the American people on whose behalf this violence is being perpetrated. But on the other hand, I guess at some point you say, well, the people down in the region, I guess if you listen to the folks who are there, they must be enormously frustrated by, well, at least they're politicians anyway, must be enormously frustrated by the drug trade to the extent, to which they're endorsing these attacks. So I don't know. There could be something to it. It doesn't mean the United States is doing things right or correctly or well, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't involved in the drug trade either. You're looking for proof of this. But this is why you don't kill them off the bat, even though Prime Minister of Trinidad says, yeah, you should kill them and kill them violently. Maybe she's wrong. I don't know. Anyway, other Caribbean leaders have described the U.S. military activity as a threat to the peace and security of the region. So you have that to contend with as well. Antigua and Barbuda's prime minister, a lot of and countries down there teaming up, a lot of the smaller islands that can't necessarily and don't function on their own and have lots of interconnectedness, and team up as it comes to countries. Antigua and Barbuda being another one. Their prime minister, Gaston Brown, made it clear that his country had no interest in hosting foreign military installations after Grenada's Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed that it was carefully reviewing a request from the United States. They've been invaded by us before, but everybody has. a request from the U.S. for temporary installation of radar equipment and associated technical personnel. And also a luxury golf resort, maybe. In response to U.S. military buildup in the region, Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela's president, ordered a large-scale military exercise on Wednesday and said he was mobilizing the military, police, and civilian militia to defend his country. Well, that's to be expected as well. I would imagine that they think that they'll see those attacks coming closer and closer to their border and their actual territorial waters at some point. And what can I tell you? Probably only prudent to prepare for such a thing. All right, let's see. Other items on the agenda for today. It's Friday. We can do a wide-ranging survey of information that's out there and stories to catch up with, perhaps a long read or two. That brings me, by the way, to a housekeeping note. Tuesday of next week, at least I'm not getting in Greg Dworkin's way with this one. Looks like Tuesday is going to be an away from the microphone day. Whether or not I can prepare an all-new pre-recorded show remains to be seen. We've got a weekend in between and a little extra time on either side. Perhaps we can get it done. It's college break pickup time. And, that requires me and some lifting. So I'll be away from the microphone on Tuesday. And maybe some of these stories that require a lengthier read will make tempting material for Tuesday's a pre-recorded show if we can get that together. All right. I mentioned briefly yesterday that there was a activity in the federal courts out Chicago way. That's the way you say it, I guess, if you're like in the 1940s or something. But it was just the briefest of mentions of a federal district court imposing a temporary restraining order. There's a lot of that going around against the Trump administration with respect to a couple of things. There's a couple of questions. The deployment of National Guard troops, a question mark about other states' troops being moved to Illinois and thereafter deployed onto the streets of Chicago and elsewhere. And is that legal? And so far, right there, we have a temporary restraining order basically saying, I won't order you to go back to your state of origin, but I will issue a temporary restraining order against your deployment within Illinois. And the Trump administration being the Trump administration, there is, I guess there were questions raised and answers are, I don't know, but no word on whether or not that temporary restraining order would prevent those probably Texas troops from being deployed in states other than Illinois. The temporary restraining order applies to Illinois. So basically it means they hang around wherever they're based and can't, engage in various mischief on the streets in Chicago or elsewhere in Illinois. But in addition, there were questions about whether or not whether a temporary restraining order might issue as against ICE and other federal, supposedly law enforcement officers, restricting their use because they've been very reckless and careless, I would think, I would term it, with the use of what's supposed to be non-lethal weaponry. This has been a recurring problem with police and law enforcement officers across the country for a long, long time. And I guess see Radley Balco on that one, but we've certainly made mention of it a number of times that handing police, it seemed like a good idea at the outset, right? Handing police or less lethal weaponry. I think that's what they call it now, less lethal weaponry. Anything can be a lethal weapon. It's not meant to be lethal, but if you hit people repeatedly in the head with it, that will be lethal. And we find that to be the case. It's not just imaginary. People have died that way. Oh, well, tear gas, that's a non-lethal weapon. Not if you shoot the canister directly into somebody's head, it isn't. And please don't do that because you've done it before and people have died. But handing over this less lethal weaponry, they haven't done a terrific job, I don't think, across the country in training police about A, the damage that can still be done with them, B, the fact that you can still kill people with them, and then C, there's costs involved in all of this. You don't really need to be deploying this stuff willy-nilly, and there was just really no training or regulation, it seemed, and law enforcement officers everywhere seem like, oh, well, if it's not lethal, then that's cool. I probably don't even have to fill out any paperwork if I gas people, mace people, spray them in the face with bear spray, shoot them with pellets or the pepper ball sprays that sting as well as then burn your eyes. I don't know what kind of paperwork they have to fill out for discharging those weapons. So in a lot of these situations in Chicago and other cities where federal, again, quote unquote, law enforcement officers are occupying these spaces, they've just been going to town and just discharging these chemical weapons and irritants into everybody's faces because it's hilarious to them and they don't have to write any paperwork on it. Nobody gets killed. So, I think very rightly they've been headed to the federal judiciary and asking them, hey, isn't there something, don't we have some kind of rights here? Like if we want to assemble and peaceably and seek redress for grievances, like that part of the Constitution, First Amendment stuff, we say we have a right to do it. They say we have, oh, no, we're respecting your right to do it. You just have to vomit and cry your eyes out while you're doing it because, well, it's true. You have the right to ask for a redress of grievances. It doesn't say anywhere that you have to be able to do so comfortably or while you can see or breathe. And that's not really a fair interpretation of the First Amendment, don't you think? And in fact, the federal judiciary in the Chicago area has said, yes, we at least temporarily agree. The Trump administration is set to appeal that naturally. But there's also been a couple of other rulings of late that are of interest. First, at the federal district level, I finally found one article that combined them both. I found news yesterday about the temporary restraining order about the use of tear gas and other chemical irritants being restricted. And then another report later of an insistence that the quote-unquote law enforcement officers in the area use their body cams because they've been miraculously found to be turned off every time people say, hey, they're wildly violating my civil rights. No, we're not. If we were, there'd be video of it. Well, there would be if you turned on your body cam. So now they're ordered to do that as well. And it wasn't clear from the first couple reports that I read whether it was the same judge in both instances. And it turns out, yes. And the Washington Post has that news. Judges, well, although there are lots of judges working on a lot of different moving parts, as I said, not only is there the use of chemical irritants and the body cameras, but yes, also the deployment from off of the bases. Judges, plural, admonish Trump administration, hand it legal setbacks in Chicago cases. There's more, too, at the appellate level. The Seventh Circuit Court, in a unanimous 3-judge panel ruling against the Trump administration on, I don't even remember which aspect of the legal questions swirling around the occupation of Chicago, though I'm pretty sure it is parked here somewhere in Instapaper these days. And I think the reason I chose the Washington Post article because it summed it all up. Let's find out. A federal appeals court, there it is, declined for now to let the Trump administration deploy troops in the Chicago area. So it's the deployment, leaving the bases, if you're an out-of-state National Guard member, that made it up to the appellate court and still got a pretty strong no. A different judge said she was profoundly concerned federal officers or federal officials were violating her orders on top of all of it. Not only do you have to be ordered to respect people's civil rights, but she's already concerned that I keep ordering you to do so and you keep not doing it. So is this a bylined piece or no? There we are. Mark Berman, Marianne Levine, and Kim Belware get the byline for the Washington Post. Judges on Thursday. When we say judges, then we're talking about the Seventh Circuit because there's plenty of them. On Thursday, rebuked the Trump administration for its arguments involving military troops and actions by federal officers in the Chicago area, reflecting a degree of skepticism in high-profile legal battles unfolding around the country's third biggest city. President Donald Trump has sought to deploy the National Guard in and around Chicago, not the Illinois Guard, of course. Well, he probably wanted to do that too, but there's this thing about the governor having a role in all of that. Anyway, he wanted to deploy the National Guard in and around Chicago, where his administration's immigration enforcement actions have prompted protests. A federal appeals court panel said Thursday that it would not let Trump send troops anywhere in Illinois for now, leaving in place a lower court ruling blocking his administration from dispatching the National Guard there. The spirited, sustained, and occasionally violent actions of demonstrators in protest of the federal government's immigration policies and actions without more does not give rise to a danger of rebellion against the government's authority, the panel wrote. And by the way, I think they did say it was unanimous, but that's an important subtlety that comes across there, despite the fact that they're willing to say that, okay, maybe you're right, even some of this protest has become violent. Even so, it certainly hasn't risen to the level. You just made no demonstration of anything that convinces us that this rises to the level of rebellion against the government's authority. They don't like the government's authority in this instance. They're protesting the government's authority in this instance. They're even resisting the government's authority in this instance. But I think the critical question for them was, is it now impossible without the deployment of the National Guard troops to impose general order in the Chicago area? And the answer, of course, is no. Everybody's going on about their business all over Chicago. The only people who are prohibited or who are inhibited, I guess, in going about what they think is their normal business is you. And the rest of the Chicago area doesn't need what you're trying to do in order to live a normal life.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue reading through the Washington Post's roundup of what has happened in the courts in the last couple of days. It's important. It's the law, for God's sake. Why not pay attention to it even if it doesn't appear to exist in Donald Trump's mind? Okay, so as they said, the spirited, sustained, and occasionally, we'll admit it, violent actions of demonstrators, if correct. Basically, they're just saying, I guess they would probably argue later on if they were pressed on it. You said occasionally violent. Well, that's the allegation that's being made. Our point is, without ruling on whether or not that actually rises to the level of violence, although maybe they'd be willing to say, yeah, we saw some evidence of violence. Not outrageous, but I guess something you'd have to point to as violence. I don't know. Even so, you still haven't risen. It hasn't risen to the level where you're going to win if you're relying on that as your excuse for deploying troops in the area. So no, it does not give rise to a danger of rebellion against the government's authority. That's the test, and you fail. Federal officials remain in and around the Chicago area as a part of an immigration action called Operation Midway Blitz, which sounds actually quite violent. Protests and some clashes between demonstrators and authorities, and there again, Very often you find that these things are reported in the papers as clashes between authorities and protesters. And the way it manifests itself is people are protesting. The authorities say, stop protesting. People say, we will not stop protesting. And then the authorities bash them over the head and gas them. And then they say, that's a clash between protesters and authorities. And it's a clash from the authorities' view. They're clashing people over the head. But very often the protesters say, well, we were just standing here minding our own business. So I don't know. But at any rate, the court doesn't think that the clashes rise to the level of rebellion either. But protests and some clashes between demonstrators and authorities have continued to unfold in the area, particularly around an immigration and customs enforcement facility in Broadview, a nearby suburb, by the way, not Chicago itself, that has become the center of the confrontations. Why? Because ICE is there. If they left, I suppose they wouldn't. During a hearing Thursday morning, a judge said she had, quote, serious concerns that federal authorities were not following an order she issued last week, barring them from using tear gas on journalists and protesters who did not pose an immediate threat. That's the continuing difficulty with supposedly less lethal weapons, is that they just say, you are issued weapons to deal with people who pose a threat either to the public or at large or to you. Even to you, you're able to act in your own defense. That's true. What these weapons are not for is I'm too lazy to do policing, or I'm bored by my policing work and I want these people to leave so that I can go back inside and watch television. I'll gas them and then they'll run away and then I can watch my show. That's not a legitimate use of weaponry, less lethal or otherwise. But there you have it. They love doing it. We want you to move back from this area. No. Why do you want them to move back from this area? There's no particular reason, but they say, well, I don't know. They're protesting here, so we want them to move back because that's the video we often see of protests. The police want people to move away, and the people want to move closer, and we don't want that. And so the order goes out, just like you've seen it in all the videos before. Move them back 50 feet. And they can either push them back, hit them over the head until they run away, or gas them, and then they say, oh, my eyes hurt so much that I'm going to move 50 feet back. And the police say, I never laid a hand on them. Well, that doesn't count. It's still a problem for you to unleash chemical irritants in people's faces. During a Thursday hearing in the morning, a judge said she had serious concerns about federal authorities not following this order, right? I am profoundly concerned about what has been happening over the last week since I entered this order. She was profoundly concerned what was happening before, of course, but it took her a week or so to get around to establishing, hey, here's evidence of those things I'm concerned about. That was U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis, who was appointed by President Barack Obama, and she said as much from the bench. Ellis requested that Russell Hott, H-O-T-T, he's so hot, there are two T's involved, who leads Chicago's ICE field office, so, not hot in a good way, appear before her. She ordered requested that he appear before her Monday to explain, quote, images of tear gas being deployed, and reports that there were no warnings given before it was deployed out in the field. Those are the quotes. That's the request. What's happening? Why is she making the request? And it's not a great thing to get a request like that. I request that you appear before me tomorrow. And suppose you don't. Well, then after that, I'll order you to appear. But I was looking for it to be voluntary so that there wouldn't be a court order and you wouldn't feel all, angry and frustrated about being ordered to do it. But I strongly encourage you to appear before me on Monday to explain what about all this tear gas. And if you just show up and say, well, that's just a picture of tear gas being deployed. Yeah, what about it? And I will say, oh, yeah, right. How does that relate to my order to you not to do it under these circumstances? I don't know, Your Honor. It fell off a truck. I guess that's basically it. And again, no warnings either, right? So, this is just, we keep seeing these images too of protesters yelling from behind the line that the police have established. You can't be any closer than this. So they go right up to that line and they say, now that I'm at this line, police, you suck. And you can't just pepper spray a person in the face because they said that. but cops think that they can. Judges say maybe not. Ellis said she had seen images in the news about what was happening with demonstrators. So did President Trump, by the way. But presumably, I mean, maybe not, but presumably Ellis checked, is this a current, is this video of something that happened in Chicago? Because apparently the Trump administration is circulating videos online. Chicago is a war zone. We have to crack down. We need to have troops. And here's video of several years ago in other places, Florida, somewhere else. I don't know why Florida comes to mind, but it did. If you're going to do that sort of thing, I mean, I guess everybody's assumption is that they'll actually be showing you Chicago and right now, which is why they can, exploit that by just showing violent scenes, and everybody will say, it must be Chicago right now. Don't know whether the judge probably said, I need for you to establish for me that these are videos currently in the Chicago area. Yes, that's what evidence is all about. The judge said she would modify her earlier order that governed the use of force and expand it to require all federal immigration agents participating in the Midway Blitz campaign to wear body cameras. She did not immediately modify the order, though, and asked the parties in the case to confer about the issue. So that's on the table. She wants to have some words with them to see whether it's absolutely necessary and whether it's fully grounded to make this order going forward. ICE officers do not routinely wear body cameras. While ICE began a pilot program under President Joe Biden after an executive order directed federal law enforcement agencies to develop policies for camera use, the effort was never fully funded. And that'll be on Republicans for you probably. Trump reversed the Biden executive order. The Department of Homeland Security has said giving ICE agents body cameras remains a priority, which is an interesting thing to say in the face of Trump's repeal of the executive order. And frankly, they should arrest Pam Bondi for it. But, we'll see whether that happens. Tricia McLaughlin, a DHS spokeswoman, which is to say the person who has to go out in front of the cameras and, lie constantly in order to attempt to make it sound like the DHS knows what it's doing, and is doing so lawfully, which it's not. Tricia McLaughlin, really one of the worst, actually, I would say, said in a statement that the agency will continue to oppose all efforts to vilify law enforcement and prop up the cause of violent rioters, which is not happening, of course. She said any order requiring body cameras would be an extreme act of judicial activism, even though, it isn't in the least. Tricia McLaughlin's one of the worst liars they've got, and that is saying something in the face of Karoline Leavitt and her lines yesterday. For all the people who used to gasp and clutch at their pearls over somebody saying that some Trump supporters were deplorable in one way or another, Karoline Leavitt, of course, on camera just yesterday, going to town on the Democratic base is criminals and thugs and drug dealers and illegal immigrants and all. I mean, really just insane. But that wasn't necessarily the most insane thing that she had to say yesterday. But maybe we'll get to some of that. Anyway, Tricia McLaughlin close on her heels in terms of her corruptness. The case before Ellis involved a group representing journalists and unions who sued the Trump administration this month, alleging that federal officials used a pattern of extreme brutality in a concerted and ongoing effort to silence the press and civilians. Well, they did. The Trump administration wrote in court papers that the lawsuit threatened to, quote, tie the hands of federal law enforcement officers and endanger them, which, of course, it did not. Well, because generally speaking, the judge was saying, well, what I'm saying is that you can't deploy these weapons if you're not in imminent danger. If you are in imminent danger and you can establish that, then you'll probably be fine deploying these weapons. The thing is, I keep seeing you not being in imminent danger and deploying them, on top of which, when I order you not to deploy them when you're not in imminent danger, I am also seeing evidence of you ignoring that after I told you that. So, you're really not doing that great. You're on thin ice as it is. So, okay, federal officials have also argued in other court filings that they needed troops in the Chicago area to help protect their personnel and property. I need someone to protect me if I deploy tear gas in someone's face and it doesn't immediately incapacitate them. They might get angry and attack me. And I need someone to, my hands are busy spraying this tear gas in their face. Somebody else has to do the clubbing of them over the head in order to keep them off of me. That's essentially what their request is. Officials in the area have encountered ongoing and sustained attacks, they wrote, and that necessitated the National Guard. And it's got to be Texas National Guard, too, apparently. Illinois officials sued to block the deployment, saying Trump was acting illegally and that his administration was intruding on the state's sovereignty. Last week, U.S. District Judge April M. Perry blocked Trump's effort to deploy troops in and around Chicago. That's the one that finally made it to the Seventh Circuit, and Perry is upheld. Perry, who was appointed by Biden, said she found a lack of credibility in federal officials' declarations in the lawsuit. That won't help you. In an order, Perry wrote that she had also taken note of a troubling trend of the declarations equating protest with riots. Again, if you're going to say there's riots going on and I ask you for evidence and you just say, well, a protest is a riot, that's not going to cut it. On Thursday, a 3-judge panel with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit wrote in an opinion that it was maintaining the block on troops being deployed in Illinois. The National Guard troops will remain under federal control, the panel said. They didn't upend that. The order keeps in place the status quo in Illinois. The Chicago-based Seventh Circuit on Saturday had paused part of Perry's order, saying Trump could federalize the National Guard within Illinois for now, but not deploy the troops. So that's interesting. And I guess that's not the Texan troops then. That Trump could federalize control of the Illinois National Guard, but all he could do is say, while you're on your bases, I control you. I can't order you to leave. That doesn't sound like, federalized control, but I guess that's an interesting compromise. We'll see. An 18-page opinion linked herein, if you'd like to examine it over the weekend, released on Thursday afternoon. The Seventh Circuit panel said it concluded that the factors before it weighed against staying Perry's order pending appeal. The judges also said they determined Perry's factual findings were not clearly erroneous. That's the standard for reversing them, adding that there appeared to be relatively little harm in leaving the troops under federal control but not deployed. Yeah, I guess so. The panel's members were Judges Ilana Diamond-Rovner, David Hamilton, and Amy J. St. Eve. Rovner was appointed to the circuit court by President George H.W. Bush. We now have to go through this exercise every time. Hamilton by Obama and St. Eve by Trump. So, yeah, there was a Trump judge on the panel, and they agreed nonetheless. While Trump administration officials had argued in court papers that the situation in and around Chicago equaled, quote, a rebellion against federal authority, unquote, the panel disagreed by 3-0. In their opinion, the judges said they found insufficient evidence of a rebellion or danger of rebellion in Illinois, like the reality. The White House said that Trump acted lawfully, quote, to protect federal officers and assets, and signaled that it was not done fighting the issue in court. There's only one court left. That's the Supreme Court. Anything goes there. President Trump will not turn a blind eye to the lawlessness plaguing American cities, and we expect to be vindicated by a higher court. Abigail Jackson, White House spokeswoman, said in a statement. So she's the understudy to Karoline Leavitt. Another judge on Thursday also weighed in a separate issue involving federal officials in Chicago. There's a lot going on. A federal immigration agent shot a woman in the city this month. You know about that story. And her attorney and government lawyers have offered opposing accounts about which party crashed their car into the other's vehicle. This was an interesting development in the last couple of days. I didn't mention it on the air yet. During a Thursday hearing, attorneys revealed that the federal agent's vehicle, and you remember the federal agents said, we shot her because she rammed our ICE vehicles. 10 times she rammed our vehicles. And then it turns out, well, it wasn't 10. It was 0, but there is a 0 in the number 10, so, it's not totally a lie. The number was 0, and in fact, it was the ICE vehicles that rammed her vehicle. But if you were going to make an allegation like that in court, one of the things you might do is say, examine the ICE vehicles that were supposedly rammed, maybe take some photographs, present that in court as evidence that they had been rammed. But in order to do that, you'd have to like establish, okay, this is a photograph. Who took it? I took it. What did you use? This camera. When did you take it? This day, this time. Is it time stamped? If not, why not? Do you have metadata on it? So you can establish that this is, in fact, a picture of this car. By the way, where's the car? Where did the car go immediately after the accident? Did you take these pictures at the scene? Is the car available for physical examination now? All of these things that are supposed to, every time we talk about the presumption of regularity in court, all of these things that seem like dumb questions are assumed to be being asked and answered in regular order so that you can establish, yeah, this is the car. Everybody agrees this is the car. Everybody agrees these are photographs of the car. Everybody agrees that you took those pictures and you took them on this date and this is the phone that you used. All of those things are part of the chain of evidence that gets you to the point where you're allowed before a real court of competent jurisdiction to enter that stuff into evidence. Just bringing me pictures isn't enough. That's enough on social media, but then you say things like, did AI generate this? Or is this in fact a picture of another vehicle that was rammed in Florida 10 years ago, right? We get all those questions out of the way by establishing the chain of custody of this particular evidence or the provenance of the evidence that's being proffered in court. And there's a problem, as it turns out. During the hearing on Thursday, attorneys revealed that the federal agent's vehicle, a key piece of evidence in the case, was not in FBI custody or even still in Chicago. Well, that is something. Where is it? It's over 1,000 miles away, Your Honor. Really? Why? Well, it was driven there. Okay. Further questions. Why was it driven there? Who drove it? Where did it go? It had been driven more than 1,100 miles away to Maine. Why? Following the October 4th incident. Well, as it turns out, the agent, I guess, is from Maine, and it was his personal vehicle, or maybe it was an official vehicle, and they're from, I don't know, deployed from Maine to Chicago for some reason. You drove it away. Yes. And I guess you had no problem driving 1,100 miles, right? No, I guess not. So even if there was a ramming, you might say that it really wasn't all that damaging. No, I wouldn't say that. I would say, you know what? I was killed in this ramming, as a matter of fact. I was murdered by the defendant. Really? Come on. Right? You're going to drive 1,100 miles in a vehicle that had been rammed to the extent that you needed to shoot the occupant of the other vehicle? It's not going to look good. And it won't even be entered into evidence because they're not going to be able to establish that the evidence is uncontaminated. Where's the damn vehicle? You showing me pictures of, oh, look at all this damage. Where's the vehicle now? I don't know. Elsewhere? All right. Well, guess what? Those photos are now not going to be admissible as evidence in all likelihood. Oh, you mean so we have no evidence in this case in which a defendant has been shot by us? Yeah. Damn, that ain't good. We probably shouldn't have done that. Oh, well, there we are. So this development raised questions about the handling of evidence in the government's case against Marimar Martinez, who, amazingly enough, they shot a person named Martinez, 30, shot by a Customs and Border Protection agent in the Chicago area. Like, we're not even really close to the border, though, guys. Martinez and Anthony Ruiz, 21, were indicted last week on federal charges of assault and attempted murder of a federal employee. Now, they were shot. They didn't shoot anybody. Well, they rammed their vehicle. Well, did they? No. Can you even have the vehicle in the neighborhood? No. But I'm still charging with attempted murder of a federal employee. Both have pleaded not guilty. And given that this will be handed over to federal prosecutors, chances are they'll be found not guilty too. That's another bit of a story from elsewhere. In one of the cases being pressed against all odds and against all the evidence as well in D.C., Jeanine Pirro. Go home, Jeanine Pirro, you're drunk? Well, that doesn't make any difference. She's drunk in public all the time. High-profile case that they pressed against another protester that was arrested, and at some point in the scuffle around their being arrested, and this is not resisting arrest, but rather being arrested and being thrown around by the police officers, apparently one of them captured on video, well, when we were tossing this person about, one of their knees came close to the groin of one of the agents affecting the arrest. Oh, did they get hurt? No, they didn't make any contact. So, well, we're going to charge them with assault because their knee was nearby. And by the way, this is one of those cases that they a couple of times tried to get a grand jury to indict them on assault charges, felony charges, and the grand jury just said, no, there's no assault here. So they charged them with a misdemeanor, which doesn't require a grand jury indictment. You can charge them by information from the U.S. Attorney's Office. And big bad Jeanine Pirro pressed ahead with the misdemeanor charge, went to a jury. Yeah, not guilty. Unanimous, not guilty. Sorry, bye. So huge embarrassment for Jeanine Pirro, to the extent that Jeanine Pirro can be embarrassed. And not just erase it with a box of wine, I guess. Anyway, happening all over the place. Likely to happen in Chicago, too. All right, where were we here? Chris Parente, Martinez's attorney, said he learned earlier in the day that the vehicle, remember that vehicle, was not in FBI custody. Problematic. Federal prosecutors told the judge they, too, were surprised to learn where the vehicle was, saying the agent's supervisors had authorized him to drive the federally issued vehicle, okay, it wasn't personal, back to Maine following his Chicago assignment. And really, honestly, isn't the answer, why don't you leave the vehicle here since we're literally making a federal case of it, and take the Greyhound or fly at federal expense, no doubt, back to Maine. You don't have to take this vehicle with you. Unless, of course, you need to take the vehicle because you have been, let's say, lying from start to finish about who rammed who, and the physical condition of the vehicle would reveal that you had done the ramming. Why don't we get this vehicle out of here real quick? And, because your assignment in Chicago was over. Parente, a former federal prosecutor, said after the hearing that handling key evidence this way was worrisome and unusual. Right. So again, just, before I sum up with the article, there's only a sentence or two left. But if you're still scratching your head over the conclusion that federal judges all over the country are reaching, that there is no longer a presumption of regularity on the part of the government, this is the answer as to why they are doing such basic things as hustle the evidence out of state and hide it quick, but that'll mean that we'll have to, the jury will definitely acquit the defendant. Who cares? They'll have to spend money and time answering our questions in court, and we'll continue to tell the White House press office to tell reporters that we are indicting and trying murderers all over the country, people who are trying to kill law enforcement officials. You haven't gotten any convictions at all. Zero. None. You mean you're completely wrong about this? Yeah, but the point is we got the headlines. All right. The final word on this from the article. At his request, U.S. District Judge Georgia Alexakis, appointed by Biden, ordered the vehicle returned to Chicago and sought communications between the CBP agent and their supervisor. So now you got a case on, did you intentionally manipulate and hide or falsify in any way the evidence in this case? That's on you. Not only do you lose the presumption of regularity, but you might have federal charges you're looking at as well. All right, there you go. Just thought I would add that to the mix on a Friday. There are other things, of course, to share with you. Oh, yeah, here's one. Can I cue this one up on the big computer? Is that easy to do? Aaron Rupar doing his usual good work, capturing video from the White House. I mentioned to you that Karoline Leavitt had been kind of going crazy lately with, par for the course, with her accusations about, Democrats and their base being all criminals, et cetera, et cetera. But let me see if I can play you this one. I just thought this one was interesting internally. It's only a minute or so, this clip. And you see what happened. Karoline Leavitt Some people are really, really skilled, smooth, and adept at doing their lying and misdirection, and I don't think she's really one of them. She's just sort of a blunt force liar, I would say. All right, let me pause this thing. Yeah, it's just under a minute. Most of his clips are just under a minute. This is Karoline Leavitt claiming that, well, I don't even know which judge this one is. Oh, this is one of the federal judges asked to block federal layoffs during the shutdown, which they are blaming on the shutdown, even though the shutdown has nothing to do with it. They've wanted to fire these people for a long time. This is really interesting. So one of the another case in which the judges say, no, these firings, layoffs, RIFs, what have you, are illegally done. You have no authority to do this. In fact, the federal authority says you can't do this. So we're temporarily blocking you from doing it until the Supreme Court says, oh, by the way, there's no such thing as a law. But that has to be their job, not ours. So Karoline Leavitt takes the air on Fox News, of course, to say that the judge had, quote, no legal rationale for ruling against Trump. Now, usually when they rule, they say, here's my legal rationale, and calls the judge's previous rulings illegal. So it's the judges who are doing all the illegal stuff, you know. But see if you can spot the internal problem in this 1 minute of Karoline Leavitt speaking to a camera.
And now you have this far left district court Democrat appointed judge who literally just uses politics from the bench and has no legal rationale for this nationwide temporary restraining order. And she is now blocking the administration from doing what the Supreme Court has already affirmed the President of the United States can do. In fact, this very same judge out of liberal San Francisco in May illegally ruled that the administration and the president does not have the right to fire executive branch employees, and the Supreme Court smacked this judge down in July. She is wrong. She is doing this for political reasons, and the Democrats know that they can judge shop, they can court shop, they can go to this woman because she is a far left hack and she uses politics from the bench. We are very confident we are going to win this temporary restraining order, and the Trump administration will continue to try to fight through this shutdown and get the government back open so we can get people back to work.
All right, now I'm going to pause it there. Finally, we finished it. I had to do my music over it. Did you see the internal problem with that? I mean, there were a lot of problems with what she was saying. They were all wrong. They were very largely lies. But did you like that one? This judge is stopping us from firing all these people, and we're trying to open the government so we can get people back to work. No, they're not. They're fighting to fire people. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That was a neat trick. I was able to run Karoline Leavitt's Lion audio over the outro music, although I had to turn it down a little bit so that you could hear her. So there was an awful lot that was wrong with that statement, including, of course, an outrageously left-wing activist judge is lying and being a criminal from the bench, and bargle. All right, all of that was obviously upside down and backwards, but I really loved that whole thing about this judge is wrong. What was she wrong about? She was wrong about stopping us from doing a thing. Oh, yeah, like the goose meme here. What was the thing you were trying to do, Karoline? Well, this judge said we couldn't fire all these people. And we're so mad about that because we're trying to open up the government and get everybody back to work. The case is about you trying to not allow people to go back to work, Karoline. Okay, but, you know, standard stuff from a Republican mouthpiece inside the White House. She's just, you know, the worst of the worst when it comes to her vitriol and lying, and it's all a huge Hatch Act violation, but never mind any of that. Anyhow, I just thought I'd bring you up to speed on the very many ways in which Karoline Leavitt, you know, violates all the standards every day, time and time again. Okay. There are other things happening, and I wanted to bring them to your attention. And let's see, did I not park this anywhere? I guess I was just. I have mixed feelings in many of these cases. The real tragedy of the Trump administration is that, legally speaking, one of the big tragedies, I guess, is that they are expending so much energy trying to bring federal charges against their political enemies, but that so many of their political enemies are Republicans who have screwed over the country and the opposition in the form of the Democratic Party so many times that it's hard to have any sympathy for them when they are brought up on charges by a Republican president. But there you have it. James Comey, not a hugely sympathetic figure for the show. And I mean, like, wind back the clock before he was facing federal charges and ask us how we felt about James Comey, doing what he was doing in October of 2016. There were Democrats and people on this show raging that, he should face federal charges about that stuff. And ironically, it is somehow the Donald Trump administration bringing charges against them, but bringing them in a different form and for a different reason. Although, believe me, we've also noted with some amazement how the Trump administration, both the first and second Trump administrations, and in between, have exploited Democratic anger at James Comey and have actually said, we ought to bring him up on federal charges for what he did to poor old Hillary Clinton. They've actually said that. Well, at least Trump himself has actually said that. So that's kind of amazing. Now, John Bolton has been indicted, and we're supposed to be, I guess, moping around saying what an abuse of the federal prosecutorial power that is. And it is. But, we're not terribly torn up about it happening to John Bolton himself. But, in the interest of the service of justice, we have to say these things. And so here's what I've got for you here. I've got a couple of stories parked in my email about it. There's mostly from The Hill because they're relentless self-promoters. Can't really argue about that. We got something from the New York Times as breaking news yesterday. We can go with their direction. Breaking news, John Bolton is said to be indicted. I guess they really wanted to get that report out earlier, over handling of classified information. But let's see whether there's any more buried in that. Former Trump aide John Bolton is indicted over handling of classified information. That's the new headline now. I don't know why they went with is said to be indicted, but that might be just a nod toward the possibility that the Trump administration is lying its ass off at the time they went to press the time they went to email anyway. Former Trump aide John Bolton is indicted over handling classified information, says the headline. Mr. Bolton, who has become a critic of his former boss, and that's how you get yourself indicted by this administration, is among a string of presidential foes to become prosecutorial targets. Better put, I think, is among a string of former presidential aides who have become presidential foes for some unknown reason, who then were prosecutorial targets for a very known reason. That is to say, the earlier part of this phrase, that they have become presidential foes. But his case gained momentum in the Biden administration. Okay. Let's see what they mean by that. That's like the overall headline, which sits atop one of those live threads being updated every so often. And it's also the pinned top of the line here. Shall we read that one? I guess so. The basics. John R. Bolton, the national security hawk and former advisor to President Donald Trump, who became one of his most outspoken critics. Well, not including the one who said he was an effing idiot, who used to be his Secretary of State, or various others, including someone else who's now resigned their federal position, and I guess will shortly be free to speak about these things. Well, Bolton was indicted by a federal grand jury in Maryland on Thursday on charges of mishandling classified information. So it didn't come back as a no bill. He did get indicted, so there is that, but it's interesting. I don't know how I would bet that a Maryland federal jury would go on this. I mean, there is some evidence that there are some questions lingering, so you could go ahead with the indictment on the ham sandwich standard. But it sounds likely that he's got a good enough case in his own defense that a Maryland federal grand jury or federal petty jury will eventually say, nah, not going to find you guilty on this one. On the other hand, it was a wise choice. I mean, I guess they indicted him in Maryland. He lives in Maryland, so they didn't, forum shop for this. But you could probably find a federal jury in Maryland that would say, I know this helps the Trump administration look like they know what they're talking about, but F. John Bolton He's guilty. I don't know. I don't know whether they're really going to hold a grudge like that at this point. The indictment against Mr. Bolton was 18 counts and accused him of using personal email and messaging apps to share more than 1,000 pages of diary notes, but they enclosed that diary in scare quotes. Diary notes about his day-to-day activities as Mr. Trump's national security advisor from 2018 and 19, or in those 2 years. The notes, which were sent to 2 family members who did not have security clearances, included national defense information, such as details classified as top secret, according to the indictment. And you don't want to do that. President Trump and his former aide parted bitterly toward the end of his first term, and the president greeted the news with grim satisfaction. He's a bad guy, Mr. Trump said in response to a question from a reporter at the White House about Mr. Bolton. That's the way it goes. No follow-up, of course, like you said, only the best people, something, yada, yada. Why do you keep bringing these people into your administrations and then indicting them later? What is your problem? Well, while Mr. Bolton is part of a string of perceived enemies of the president to become prosecutorial targets, the federal investigation into him gained momentum during the Biden administration when U.S. intelligence agencies gathered what former officials have described as troubling evidence. Okay. The prosecution appeared to follow normal department channels without firings or forced transfers. So that too. Maybe it's real. Kelly O. Hayes, the U.S. attorney in Maryland, was among the career prosecutors to sign off on the charges in conjunction with the Justice Department's National Security Division. So they're a key difference between, say, the indictments of James Comey or Letitia James, for instance. By contrast, Mr. Trump in recent weeks has removed or sidelined prosecutors in order to secure indictments against 2 of his longtime targets, Comey and James, as I just mentioned. If convicted of these charges, Bolton, now 76 years of age, could spend the rest of his life in prison. Each count carries a maximum potential sentence of 10 years. And I mean, again, hey, I hate it when the Trump administration cheats and prosecutes its personal and political enemies. On the other hand, put me in a time machine, zap us back a couple of years and say, did you know John Bolton could spend the rest of his life in prison? You'd say, woo, touchdown, we did it. And then, add to that fact that, this investigation was handled under the Biden administration. Oh, you mean there's real reason to take it seriously? Yes. And he might go to jail for the rest of his life? Yes. I'm having a hard time wrestling with this. Okay, tell me more. Mr. Bolton is expected to surrender to authorities on Friday, that's today, and make the initial court appearance in Greenbelt, Maryland later that day. Attorney General Pam Bondi welcomed the charges against Mr. Bolton. Anyone who abuses a position of power and jeopardizes our national security should be held accountable, she said. No one is above the law. Yeah. Hardy har har. Did anybody tell her that the charges were developed under the Biden administration? Oh, well, in that case, they're totally false. But they're against one of your enemies. Oh, in that case, they're totally true. Anyway, Bolton, in a statement, declared that the indictment was part of an intimidation campaign against critics of Mr. Trump. It is also that. I look forward to the fight to defend my lawful conduct and to expose his abuse of power. All right. I'm excited about that as well. Let them fight meme.jpg. Mr. Bolton's written descriptions of, or I guess that's a GIF people see most normally. Anyway, oh, yes, right. The 2 family members who received Bolton's notes were not identified in the 26-page indictment, but prosecutors said Bolton occasionally used his AOL and Google email accounts to send notes to them. Probably improper, but it ain't no signal gate, but whatever. Mr. Bolton's written descriptions of where he learned information often indicated that he recognized that he was describing carefully guarded government secrets, the indictment added. Oh, that's real evidence. One entry by Mr. Bolton began, the intel briefer said, while another read, while in the situation room, I learned... Making matters worse, Mr. Bolton's emails were later hacked by someone associated with the government of Iran, the indictment said. That's not necessarily his fault that it was hacked by Iran, but of course, that's why you're not supposed to park sensitive information there. You will be hacked by Iran in your personal accounts. you can't put classified information there for that reason. A representative for Bolton notified the U.S. government of the hack on or about or in or about July of 2021, but did not tell the U.S. government that the account contained national defense information. Curious. Including classified information that Bolton had placed in the account from his time as National Security Advisor, according to the filing. One surreal section of the indictment described Mr. Bolton apparently being taunted by his hacker. A message on July 25th, 2021 warned, "I do not think you would be interested in the FBI being aware of the leaked content of John's email, some of which have been attached." The email went on to declare, "This could be the biggest scandal since Hillary's emails were leaked, but this time on the GOP side. Contact me before it's too late." A representative of Mr. Bolton forwarded the email to the FBI. I don't know how to feel about that one. The indictment laid out exchanges between Bolton and two family members that made it clear he was meticulously assembling a record with their help with the intent of turning it into a book. All three knew they needed to be discreet. A day after Bolton joined the White House in April of 2018, the indictment said they started using an encrypted messaging app. "Why are we using this now? The encryption?" one of Mr. Bolton's correspondents asked. "Yup," the other responded. Mr. Bolton then chimed in, "For diary in the future!" 4 exclamation points. Interesting. So John Bolton, an underhanded kind of guy. Again, mixed feelings on this one. He went into service in the Trump administration on day one with the idea that he would be secreting out information to write a book, probably about how dumb and dangerous Donald Trump was. How do we feel about that? Mixed. But he's right. He's not morally right, but he's correct. Donald Trump deserved to be exposed that way. But don't commit crimes along the way while you're trying to expose that. I don't know. The charging document laid out a number of 20 to 50 page documents that Bolton sent to 2 other people over the app. It is Signalgate. Dang. I don't know whether it was Signal or not. After sending one 24-page document about his time as National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolton followed up with a message that read, "None of which we talked about." 3 exclamation points. I don't know. One of the recipients wrote back, "Shh. I see. Okay. And I was never here." Okay. Mr. Bolton's lawyer, Abby Lowell, it's good thing he got himself a good lawyer there, said in a statement that the facts of the case were investigated and resolved years ago. Mr. Bolton, like many public officials, kept diaries. That's not a crime. Mr. Lowell added, those diaries, Mr. Lowell said, were unclassified records that were shared only with his immediate family and known to the FBI as far back as 2021 when they said stop doing it. And it was hacked. In August, FBI agents searched Mr. Bolton's Maryland home and his office in Washington, carrying out boxes of papers, computer files, and other materials as part of the investigation. Subsequent court filings indicated that some of the documents had low-level classification markings. Thursday's filing said that printed versions of Bolton's diary entries, which contained classified information, were found in the search of his home. The New York Times has previously reported that the United States gathered data from an adversary's spy service, including emails with sensitive information that Bolton, while working in the first Trump administration, appeared to have sent to people close to him on unclassified systems, the people said, speaking on conditions of anonymity. Of course, Bolton apparently sent the messages to people close to him who were helping him gather material he would use in his 2020 memoir, The Room Where It Happened, which offered a highly critical behind-the-scenes look at the Trump administration. Yes, we know from this article. None of the classified information described in the indictment was mentioned in the book, according to the filing. Oh, that's interesting. Which said that Mr. Bolton shared intelligence about a foreign adversary's plan for a future missile launch, a covert action in a foreign country, and sensitive sources and methods used to collect intelligence. Bolton has been a prolific television pundit for more than a decade, and Thursday's indictment used some of his own statements against him, including his declaration that if he had done what Hillary Clinton did, using private email servers as Secretary of State, quote, I'd be in jail right now. Yeah. That is a bad quote for this case, don't you think? Because then you went ahead and did what Hillary Clinton did using private email servers, not as Secretary of State, but as National Security Advisor. And I'd be in jail right now. And now you're facing enough jail time to die in prison. Oh, well. Prosecutors also cited his criticism of the Trump administration earlier this year when it was disclosed that officials had used Signal, a commercial messaging app, to discuss an upcoming military strike in Yemen. Quote, I couldn't find a way to express how stunned I was that anybody would do this, even though I totally did it, but in a safe way. He said, in April, you simply don't use commercial means of communications, whether it's supposedly an encrypted app or not, for these kinds of discussions. Yeah. While the Bolton case has taken a number of unexpected turns over the years, it stretches back to the waning days of the first Trump administration when White House officials were furious that Bolton had written the book. Shortly before Bolton's memoir was published, the administration went to court seeking to delay its release. The Justice Department around that time also opened a criminal investigation into whether Bolton had mishandled classified information by disclosing certain details in the book. This is a different angle on the case. A judge later concluded that he might have published classified information, but the criminal investigation appeared to languish until the intelligence about these emails were gathered years later. A 2021 settlement of the litigation over the book included the condition that Mr. Bolton return to the government any material in his possession that may contain classified information. Earlier this year, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, briefed Kash Patel, the quote-unquote FBI director, on the information collected about Bolton's emails. The officials believed that the material Bolton had transcribed into the unclassified and unsecured email contained classified information. And it looks like it did. Each intelligence agency makes its own determinations about what information is classified. So it's often up to the originating agency to decide whether pieces of information are classified and how sensitive they are. Bolton was investigated under the Espionage Act, as everyone seems to be, as was Trump, by the way, a 1917 law that has in recent years taken on an outsized role in American politics as investigators have pursued similar cases against high-profile officials or candidates. In this case, the guy who's president right now, for instance. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Mrs. Clinton was investigated for her use of a private email server to handle her work as Secretary of State. Not only did that cause problems for her, but it drove James Comey so crazy that he ended up blurting it all out in the middle of an election season. And not totally unrelated to that, he now finds himself in the dock. Anyway, in 2022, FBI agents searched Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida and found more than 100 classified documents in addition to others retrieved earlier. Mr. Trump was indicted in that case, but the charges were dismissed by a trial judge during the 2024 presidential campaign, not because he hadn't violated the Espionage Act, not because he wasn't guilty, but because it might, impact the outcome of an election, which is odd given that, of course, James Comey impacted the outcome of an election by blabbing about it in October of 2016. But, we'll do better next time. Wink. And in early 2023, the Justice Department appointed a special counsel. You may have heard of him. It's Jack Smith, to investigate how classified documents had ended up at Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is the, what's his name? The the Connecticut guy. Greg would remember his name offhand. Sorry. This is not even that one. That one's the, look into how the Russia investigation was started. This is the yet another special counsel, Robert Hur, appointed by Merrick Garland to investigate what? To investigate how classified documents had ended up in Joe Biden's office and home after he left the vice presidency. Wow, there's a lot of special counsels out there. And by the way, you know what's working out spectacularly? The notion that Democrats should bend over backwards to make sure that all FBI directors, all of them, from the very beginning, and all the special counsels, too, that have been appointed of late, should all be Republicans. Why? Because then Republicans can't accuse them of political bias. What are the Republicans doing now to no end and occupying all the headlines with? It is, of course, accusing those very same Republicans who were appointed as FBI directors in the past and as special counsels of political bias against Donald Trump. Everybody is biased against Donald Trump for some strange reason. All the Republicans who become FBI directors, James Comey, Christopher Wray, saying, he's actually quite wrong about most of the things that he's accusing the rest of the country of doing. Donald Trump is. Well, put him in the dock then. So far, no charges against Christopher Wray, even though Christopher Wray was the guy that Donald Trump chose to replace James Comey when he fired James Comey for not killing the Russia investigation. And then Christopher Wray said, when someone asked him, by the way, were the results of the 2020 presidential election legitimate? Yes, they were. Okay, you're an enemy of the state too. As soon as I get back to being the state, I will declare you an enemy of the state. That happened. It's real. Jack Smith, yeah, indict him too, because he was a special counsel. Where did they get him from? Republicans. Why did they choose him? Because Democrats were worried that they would be accused of political bias if they didn't choose a Republican. And then a Republican did, in fact, indict Donald Trump. It's unassailable, right? He's a Republican. No, he's a secret Democrat. We hate all of you anyway. Robert Hur, he'll be in trouble was in trouble with Trump for letting Biden off the hook, any number of, you name it. If they're a special counsel, they came from Republican ranks, no matter who they indicted. Anyway, that's working out real great, by the way. So next time around, maybe Democrats, if you get the chance to nominate an FBI director, just go ahead and do it and let it be a Democrat. It's okay. You're going to be attacked anyway. Just, in case that happens. All right. I mentioned that there were some other things in the news about other resignations that are important. The New York Times, because they're an important newspaper still, even though you all hate them, has this news and made it available to me because they, like The Hill, are relentless self-promoters. Good for you. As it happens, we mentioned earlier, Trump is blowing up boats left and right, whether they're from Venezuela or not, whether they have drugs on them or not, whether the people on board are from Venezuela or not, or Colombia or anywhere. It doesn't matter. Blowing them up all over the place. It's causing problems. How do we know? Well, we need to surmise that that's the case at this point, because right now he's not free to talk about it, but the head of the U.S. military's Southern Command is stepping down, officials say. How southern is Southern Command? Does it cover the Caribbean? Yes, it does. Who's stepping down? Admiral Alvin Holsey. By the way, just pointing for the record, appears to be a gentleman of color and not being fired by the administration, astonishingly enough, but stepping down. Maybe after a long career, it's time to hang it up, right? Admiral Holsey has been in the job for less than a year as chief of the Southern Command. Like, that's a pinnacle, career pinnacle right there. Something that officers look forward to for years before finally attaining that status. But in the role for less than a year and having to leave. And by the way, he looks less than pleased in this file photo of him, but we don't know why he's displeased in this photo. We know why he may be displeased, though, enough to leave the job less than a year into his tenure. And this also happened, coincidentally, as the Pentagon escalates attacks against boats in the Caribbean Sea. Eric Schmidt, Tyler Pager team up to report the news. The military commander overseeing the Pentagon's escalating attacks against boats in the Caribbean Sea that the Trump administration says are smuggling drugs said on Thursday that he was stepping down. Now, it would be a great honor to be put in charge of the Southern Command, and an even greater honor, I would think. I doubt very many officers in the United States Navy would say, you know what I hate? Killing drug dealers. Quite honestly, they probably were looking forward to it their whole time, but they probably wanted to do it legally. They have no sympathy for the drug dealers. They just have to actually be drug dealers. Anyway, the officer, Admiral Alvin Holsey, Holsey, is leaving his job as head of the U.S. Southern Command, which oversees all operations in Central and South America. Like, that's big. Even as the Pentagon has rapidly built up some 10,000 forces in the region in what it says is a major counter-drug and counter-terrorism mission. So not only has he achieved the command of these operations, it being itself a command, Southern Command, it's a big deal. But it's happening at a time when it's taken on all sorts of increased importance, right when you'd want to stay there, in other words, normally. Now, it was unclear why Admiral Holsey is suddenly departing. He's not going to be, blabbing about it just yet. It just happened. Why was he suddenly departing less than a year into what is typically a 3-year job? and in the midst of the biggest operation in his 37-year career. But one current and one former U.S. official, both of whom spoke on condition of anonymity, of course, said that Admiral Holsey had raised concerns about the mission and the attacks on the alleged drug boats, as he was supposed to do. You know how it goes. In a statement on social media, though, Defense Secretary, who tries to pretend he's the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, made no mention of any friction with his 4-star commander. On behalf of the Department of War, which it isn't, said Mr. Hegseth, using the name of the department he now prefers, we extend our deepest gratitude to Admiral Alvin Holsey for his more than 37 years of distinguished service to our nation as he plans to retire at year's end. And I guess he does. That's a factual enough statement, and one that you make for when you're seeing off a 4-star admiral, who you don't want to talk about what was going on and what might have driven him to retire at the end of 37 years, right in the middle of, this chart-topping career pinnacle of an assignment. It'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say, and he may have an opportunity to do that before Congress if he can be summoned there to testify. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One of the things I really enjoy about reading through these articles is finding the nuances that are available in reporting. Sometimes the nuances that are missed, but you might wonder why it's not enough just to say, hey, the admiral in charge of the U.S. Southern Command has resigned for no apparent reason right in the middle of this fantastic assignment. And you could infer the rest. But, I kind of like reading through these articles to see what else there is to discuss. And, of course, to see whether there's any connective tissue or other items that it reminds me of that I should bring up. And it helps me make the next selection of the next stories. We left off, though, in the run-up to one of those situations. We had just said, so Hegseth has nothing negative so far to say, and that seems wise. Like, why provoke a fight? Especially if he may find himself testifying before Congress at some point. Why would he? Well, you might wonder, how is it that you're abandoning us in the middle of this very important operation and increase in deployment in Southern Command when you have 2 more years? You sound like the kind of person you'd want to keep an eye on things in the region. But I guess he got to the point where he's like, there's keeping an eye on it and there's becoming complicit in it. And I'm just not going to do that. I'm raising these concerns and they're overriding my concerns. And I'm a 4-star admiral. Forget this. I want to leave. Maybe I want to go play some golf. So what happened here? Hegseth has nothing terrible to say, nor did Admiral Holsey publicly voice any policy objections, urging his command's 1,200 military service members and civilians in a statement, keep charging, with 2 exclamation points. And, he's trying to get himself out of there and not cause controversy. That's the training, right? He's doing well. But other officials at the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill said the praise masked real policy tensions. Yes, of course it did. That's part of the assignment too. Mask the policy tensions. You make your objections. If they're just not listening to you, you can make an exit that makes it obvious to anyone who's ever seen anything like this. There's a problem and we should look into it, but we don't make Holsey the target, which, actually probably argues for maybe leave the guy alone and get somebody else to testify. I don't know whether that's going to, do the trick or not. Let's find out what they have on tap for us here. Other officials at the Pentagon and Capitol Hill said the praise masked real policy tensions concerning Venezuela that the admiral and his civilian boss were seeking to paper over. Well, I don't know whether he was resigning isn't going to paper over it. It sounds like Hegseth is trying to paper over it. But Holsey is making, I guess, what lawyers call a noisy exit. Why do lawyers call it that? Well, lawyers have terms for everything. But I know about the noisy exit terminology from ethics training for lawyers, where they basically say, you get yourself in a situation where it's untenable for you or unethical for you to continue representing a certain client, not because you have conflicts of interest, but because, for instance, that you become aware that they may be hiding evidence that's necessary to be uncovered in order to get a fair result in trial. If they're suppressing evidence, hiding evidence, engaged in a further criminal conspiracy to cover up what they've done, you're advocating for them, but you can't perpetrate that kind of fraud on the court. But at the same time, it would be unethical for you to resign from the case by saying, this guy is just doing more crimes and you should just catch him. Like you can't break that attorney-client privilege under the terms of which you learned that there's this evidence or whatever. But you can say, under very unusual circumstances, I am resigning from this case. Best of luck. And you make, that's a noisy exit. That is to say, you don't just blurt out what you know, because that violates the attorney-client privilege and you're still bound to honor that. But you make an exit in a way that makes it obvious to anyone who's ever seen anything like it before, or the fact that they've never seen anything like it before. Why would you be resigning from the case in the middle like this and leaving your client in the lurch? Well, I can't discuss why, but suffice to say, there are ample reasons from which you're supposed to infer, you'll be in trouble with the court if you stay and continue this way. I see. You're not allowed to say it outright, but you're making everyone, I'm leaving this case. Does everyone hear me? That's the noise in the noisy exit. Well, this, I guess, would be the military equivalent. I'm not going to say what happened. I'm just going to say, for some strange reason, after 37 years of clawing my way to the top in this job, and now having reached it, and with 2 more years in my term, I'm leaving anyway, right in the middle of the biggest operation Southern Command has seen in years. Okay, that's the noise. So, prior to Trump, I can't think of a combatant commander who left his or her post early ever. Is he right? I don't know. Who is it? It's Representative Adam Smith of Washington, senior Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, top Dem on the Senate Armed Services Committee, was even more pointed in his criticism. At a moment when U.S. forces are building up across the Caribbean and tensions with Venezuela are at a boiling point, the departure of our top military commander in the region sends an alarming signal, a noisy signal, you might even say. An alarming signal of instability within the chain of command, Mr. Reed said in a statement. Since early September, U.S. Special Operations Forces have struck at least 5 boats, now it's 6, off the Venezuelan coast that the White House says were transporting drugs, killing 27 people. I thought it was 6 boats. Now, maybe it was 6 people on the 5th boat. Is that what it is? 27 seems like the right number. American officials have privately made it clear that the main goal is to drive Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's authoritarian leader, from power. i.e. a regime change war. Yay. But a range of specialists in the laws governing the use of force have disputed the Trump administration's claim that it can lawfully kill people suspected of drug trafficking like enemy troops instead of arresting them for prosecution. As a matter of domestic law, Congress has not authorized any armed conflict. As a matter of international law, for a non-state group to qualify as a belligerent in an armed conflict, meaning its members can be targeted for killing based on their status alone, not because of anything they specifically do, it must be an organized armed group with a centralized command structure and engaging in hostilities. Admiral Holsey, who is black, they do note for the record, becomes the latest in a line of more than a dozen military leaders, many of them people of color and women who have left their jobs this year. Most have been fired by Mr. Hegseth or pushed out or given a portfolio that it would be illegal, unethical, immoral to continue in service to, and who then, self-deport from the role, let's say. Mr. Hegseth fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in case you think there's an upper limit to who he might target this way. No, that was General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., who is also black. The first woman to command the Navy, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, also fired. And the U.S. military's representative at the NATO Military Committee, Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield. He also pushed out Lieutenant General Jeffrey A. Cruz, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Others have not fit into the mold of what Mr. Hegseth considers a leader in his Pentagon. In August, the Air Force's top uniformed officer, General David Alvin, announced that he would retire early 2 years into a 4-year term. Another one of those sort of noisy exits. About 2 weeks ago, Mr. Hegseth summoned hundreds of generals and admirals from around the world to a meeting at the Marine base at Quantico, of course, in Northern Virginia. You know all about it. It was a gathering without precedent in recent memory. The Secretary told the senior officers that he was tightening standards for fitness and grooming, cracking down on even more rigorously on woke garbage, and rejecting the notion of toxic leadership. Oh, well. It was not clear on Thursday who would replace Admiral Holsey, but who just this week visited the island countries of Antigua and Barbuda. Now, if you had to guess, there's a lot of islands in the Caribbean, right? Plenty of them. I guess what odds would you give that the islands named in this story are the same as the islands named in our previous story? Antigua and Barbuda and Grenada. That's an interesting combination, don't you think? And then, of course, I think it's largely because they are the closest to Venezuela. News of the admiral's departure came a day after the New York Times reported that the Trump administration had secretly authorized the CIA to conduct covert action in Venezuela. President Trump acknowledged on Wednesday that he had authorized the covert action, which means it's no longer covert, and said the United States was considering strikes on Venezuelan territory. All of these developments come as the U.S. military is planning its own possible escalation, drawing up options for Mr. Trump to consider, including strikes inside Venezuela. Regime change war. While Admiral Holsey has been the highest-ranking military officer overseeing the airstrikes, the decision to carry them out has been driven by the White House, the boss, the one guy who, one of a very few that preside over the commander of the Southern Command. All right. Anyway, the strikes themselves have been conducted by special operations forces, with Admiral Holsey largely cut out of the decision-making. Another good reason to leave. It could be, I do want to do these murders and you're not letting me. It could still be that. Any operation to intervene militarily in Venezuela, especially without congressional authorization, would be unwise and dangerous, Senator Reid said. Admiral Holsey's resignation only deepens my concern that this administration is ignoring the hard-earned lessons of previous U.S. military campaigns and the advice of our most experienced warfighters. The Trump administration has justified its attacks, of course, as national self-defense at a time of high overdose deaths in the United States. But the surge in overdoses has been driven by fentanyl, which comes from Mexico, not South America. The size and scope of U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean region is significant. There are now about 10,000 U.S. troops, most of them at bases in Puerto Rico, but also some 2,200 Marines on amphibious assault ships. It's just floating around, barfing. In all, the Navy has 8 warships and a submarine in the Caribbean. Admiral Holsey's abrupt end to leading one of the military's highly coveted regional warfighting commands comes after a Navy career that started with his commissioning through the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps, or NROTC. We always just said ROTC, but it was an Army program. We didn't say ROTC, but N, adding it to, okay. That at Morehouse College in Atlanta in 1988. Great career path, by the way, up until the very end, I guess. The Admiral, a native of Fort Valley, Georgia, worked his way up from commanding helicopter squadrons to leading one of the Navy's prestigious aircraft carrier strike groups. He served first as the Southern Command's military deputy before taking command in November of 2024. In a message posted on the Southern Command's X account, they have one, Admiral Holsey did not explain why he was stepping down. Just, a good exit. Rah-rah, noisy though it may be because of the timing. The Southcom team has made lasting contributions to the defense of the nation and will continue to do so. I am confident you will forge ahead, focused on your mission that strengthens our nation and ensures its longevity as a beacon of freedom around the globe. And then exit. Okay. Whether or not they'll get any further comment out of him, or he'll be asked or compelled in any way to testify about what made him resign, I don't know. I guess I have my doubts about whether they want to bother the guy at this stage, but there you have it. Just wanted to, point out that was happening. Seems important. Let's see. A couple of other important pieces floating around here. Let me see if I can decide how to prioritize them. All right, maybe we ought to do this one. I got a Substack to read for you, and I know everybody hates Substack, but seems important. Whose Substack is it? Olga Lautman. Have I read Olga Lautman before? Let's see. Researcher/analyst, Russian hybrid war senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, senior investigative researcher at the Institute for European Integrity, interested in Syria, Ukraine. The Syria-Ukraine Network for Investigative Tips as well. So she's at the head of that. Just basically, your all-around international relations and military operations analyst who tells us, and this one I'm afraid to read further than the headline, little green men. That's not to say aliens, but what they used to call Russian non-official operatives back in Ukraine and Crimea in the day prior to the time during which Russia and everybody else acknowledged openly this is an invasion. Little green men spotted near Estonia as Russia continues to escalate against NATO, says Olga Lautman in her Substack. While the United States remains consumed by internal turmoil, true, we are creating this opportunity for Russia. Russia has intensified its military and shadow operations against NATO countries. In the latest incident last week, Estonian border guards reported that 7 armed men in unmarked uniforms appeared near the, Saatse Boot, Saatse, a narrow strip of Russian territory that cuts through southeastern Estonia. I guess we're going to have to take a look at that. Is that on a map? Can I see that? Will it pick up the Saatse boot on the maps? Okay. Russian Federation viewpoint is what is highlighted here with the pin on the map. Okay. So yeah, a jutting out in the shape of a boot, that's where it comes from, of Russian territory that juts into Estonia. I mean, you'd have to look really close at the borderlines, or Google that specifically in order to get that information. But it's the western shore of Lake Pikva is my best guess at the pronunciation there. And, one of several areas in which the Russian territory just juts out into them. But there's a lot of things that are weird about Russian territory, including the non-contiguous territory of Kaliningrad as well, but that has nothing to do with this. It's in the same neighborhood, obviously, but okay. What about the Little Green Men? They appeared near the border of the Saatse Butte, a narrow strip of Russian territory that cuts through southeastern Estonia. Their presence was brief but concerning, prompting Estonian authorities to close the nearby road as a precaution. Oh, that reminds me that I did see this weird news about closing roads in California over the weekend. The I-5, as they like to refer to it there. Apparently, they were asked to close it, but maybe they're not going to. But for some reason, J.D. Vance was going to be visiting a military base there, and they were going to be doing some sort of live fire exhibition for him for some strange reason, that included firing live ammunition from offshore over the I-5 while, American citizens drove back and forth happily underneath and into this military base, which, I guess you do live fire practices on military bases, right? That's not abnormal, but I guess the abnormal part is shelling it from offshore over a, highway. Apparently that in the news too. I'll have to get you that information and show it to you in the roundup. Anyway, back to Estonia. The presence of the Little Green Men. Incident resembles Russia's 2014 invasion of Ukraine, when unmarked Russian troops known as the Little Green Men were deployed in Crimea in February of 2014 to probe Ukrainian defenses and seize key sites ahead of Moscow's illegal annexation of the peninsula and the ongoing bloody occupation of parts of the Donbas region. And here a quote from one of Olga's sources here. According to Kunter Pedosky, I'm sure I'm murdering that pronunciation, operational manager of Estonia's southern prefecture, border guards observed a larger than usual Russian presence near the Saatse Butte on Friday. Russian border guards routinely patrol the area as it lies within their territory, he told ERR. What is that? It's linked. You can find out. But I guess an Estonian news outlet. However, today, we noticed significantly more movement than usual and decided to close the road to prevent possible provocations or incidents. Our priority is the safety of the people of Estonia. Recent months have seen a sharp escalation in Russia's shadow war, with drone incursions to, again, some reminders, Polish, Lithuanian, and Romanian airspace, as well as repeated violations by Russian fighter jets over the Baltic region. And Alaska, by the way. On September 19th, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighters entered Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland, which I'm also calling the Gulf of America, and remained for approximately 12 minutes before being intercepted, one of the most serious airspace breaches in recent years. Estonian Foreign Minister, Margus Tsahkna, I'm guessing, Tsahkna, said Russia had intensified operations against Western countries using both direct and indirect methods to test NATO's response and resilience. I'm going to end reading through this, or at least I'll jump down to this. I was going to end it, but this looks like it might be helpful. The reappearance of the Little Green Men is another warning that warrants close monitoring. Russia first used this tactic again in 2014 when troops without insignia seized strategic sites across Crimea under the fabricated pretense of local unrest, if that sounds familiar, while the Kremlin maintained plausible deniability. That same method of covert escalation, relying on deniable forces, cyber attacks, and sabotage rather than open warfare, remains central to Moscow's strategy. Instead of engaging NATO directly, Russia applies continuous pressure through drone incursions, cyber operations, and energy disruptions designed to erode stability, exploit hesitation, and test how far it can push before the West is willing to respond. Okay, so that's the basics of things. I wanted to raise your awareness that was happening. Don't have much further to add at this point, though. There's plenty in Olga's article, usually something I'd want to read through all the nuances of, but I do want to bring a couple other things to your attention before the weekend is upon us, including... Let's see. This report from the Harvard Crimson. which gives us some detail that we're just not getting. I don't know. I haven't read much about it in the mainstream press lately, and I don't know whether they didn't write headlines where, the grabbed my attention this way, or it's just not being covered. But this, I thought, was an important point. And people that shared it on social media and brought it to my attention that way said, look at this. This is really something that the Harvard Crimson, leave it to the student newspapers to report this stuff when the mainstream press is not. I don't know that they're really not, but what was important about the story was, you might gather from the headline, a majority of frozen federal funding has been restored, Harvard says. The gist of this story, the zeitgeist, I guess, the overall prevailing sentiment that you get from reviewing mainstream media, traditional media, whatever, is that Trump is not only waging this war against higher education, but winning it. Now, in the last couple of days, the story has been that Trump has attempted to force this compact on first a select set of elite universities around the country. They are one by one rejecting this compact, and he's now he's willing to open it up to everybody. Every college can accept this working relationship with the federal government, but it's looking more and more unpopular and more unlikely that major institutions are going to adopt it, although education observers say look for some red state public universities to attempt to agree to this. But beyond that, and beyond the fact that they're rejecting it, the story has been, well, Trump freezes these federal funds, and gosh, it's a terrible attack on higher education. And it is. But the follow-up note is these institutions are not rolling over for it, as you got the impression from early reporting, but in fact, fighting back, suing, winning, and seeing their funding restored. Why aren't we talking more about it? I don't know. What if we read the Harvard Crimson instead? Who's reporting for the Harvard Crimson? Important to give credit. They're student writers. Ella F. Oh my goodness. Niederhellman, I think that's right, and Avani B. Rai, or Ray, perhaps R-A-I. Unfortunately, I don't know how offhand to pronounce that. But guess what? Avani's name was easy to pronounce. Ella's last name was tougher this time. Anyway, Harvard has now received payments. Yay! On the majority of the funding that it lost, allegedly, since the Trump administration froze its access to federal grants this spring. The university notified faculty this month. All right, Crimson. Thanks for telling us. Most of Harvard's federal awards were reinstated in the days after a judge struck down in early September. It took a while. The Trump administration's roughly $2.7 billion freeze on multi-year grants and contract commitments. But the money itself has been slower to flow back to Harvard's coffers. It took more than 2 weeks before Harvard received $46 million in Department of Health and Human Services grants. And it was more than a week later when Harvard informed faculty in an October 1st email from Vice Provost for Research John H. Shaw and Chief Financial Officer Ritu Kalra that the majority of frozen funds had hit Harvard accounts. The university's Office of Sponsored Programs is in the process of reconciling the recent payments so they can be used to pay down research costs incurred since the grant terminations began in April, according to an email sent by Harvard School of Public Health Dean Andrea A. Baccarelli to HSPH faculty on Friday. So again, the timeline, April, Trump says, that's it, I'm freezing your money. Everybody says, to hell with that, that's illegal. How long does it take to get the money back into the accounts? April to October. That's your answer. Harvard and its units generally pay for research expenses up front, then request reimbursements from the federal government. But the funding freeze, which the Trump administration imposed after Harvard rejected a series of demands in April, again, Harvard rejecting those demands. They were asked of them. It looked like the government was declaring victory and all of that. And then they, I guess, seeded the stories in the mainstream press that, well, we're having negotiations, which people took to mean Harvard's rolling over. But I guess they weren't, though they did fire their president at some point. Well, okay, so the funding freeze, which the Trump administration imposed after Harvard rejected a series of demands in April, prevented the university from accessing reimbursements for more than 4 months until U.S. District Judge Allison D. Burroughs rejected the freeze on September 3rd. Took a while. A Harvard spokesman declined to say how much funding had been returned to the university. Why? Communications to faculty have not put a number on the amount. Why? But Harvard's research projects receive more than $600 million per year from the federal government, almost none of which flowed during the months that the funding freeze was in place. Baccarelli's email, which announced that the HSPH would loosen some of its spending guidelines, is the clearest sign so far that the grant reinstatements may be changing the financial outlook for Harvard's schools. Okay, we're not going to have time to go that much further into it. There's plenty more in this article, which I also commend to your reading over the weekend. I just wanted to put on record, A, that those problems were in fact being contested and being resolved in favor of the universities. They were winning back the funding. Yes, that stuff is illegal. Yes, it matters. Yes, courts are still operating. And that it's, as others claimed, it's up to the student reporters at the Crimson to let us know this stuff. Although maybe it's just a matter of the fire hose being too voluminous for the mainstream press to keep up. Maybe it's not. Maybe they're reporting it and the fire hose is too voluminous for us to digest. That would be a lot easier to understand and sympathize with. All right. Heading into the weekend, once again, a reminder that Tuesday will not be a live show. Hopefully we've got, there's certainly got the amount of material. The question is, do I have the time, the stamina, the breath to bring you a pre-recorded show for then? If not, well, what can I tell you? Catch up on the news. Read as much as you can. Heading into the weekend, I don't know what else to warn you of at this point, except that, keep one eye on the situation in Israel and Gaza, where both sides to the peace agreement are doing things other than peaceably abiding by it. Let's say that. And now, time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, a Friday edition that will no doubt also survey the important news from around the country and around the world. Tops on his list, it's Admiral Holsey retiring from his position. That's got to be important to him. On the rest of the menu, Trump's Albert Speer architectural obsession is not ending anytime soon. More? Sure, I'll tell you more. Attorneys general of more than a dozen states sued Trump over the termination of $7 billion in funding intended for affordable solar energy projects across the United States. And yeah, there's more. Oh, we could tell it to you too.
Networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning
with David Waldman.
Well, listed here is Susan Stamberg, the founding mother of National Public Radio and the first woman to host a national news program, has died at the age of 87. Now, if you're looking for threes to pair her up with, Diane Keaton gives us two. Ace Frehley of KISS. You probably weren't guessing him to round that trio out, but it's true. We'll see you next week.